The Middle East is home to the world's youngest population. 60% of Arabs are under 30, and a third, more than 100 million people, are aged between 15 and 29. The hopes and aspirations of Arab youth are shaping the future of the Middle East.
We believe the voices of our youth are crucial to the way we shape our future.
What do Arab youth think? How do they see their future? What do they expect from their governments? What are their hopes, fears, and aspirations? Understanding Arab youth is important for anyone who has a stake in this region. Governments, policymakers, and businesses need actionable insight into the region's largest demographic, its youth. And that is why we do the Arab Youth Survey every year for the last 9 years.
The ASDA'A Burson-Marsteller Arab Youth Survey is the largest independent study of its kind. This year's survey covered 3,500 Arab youth in 16 countries in the age group of 18 to 24. They were interviewed on a range of subjects: their concerns and aspirations, their views on the education system and the economy, the impact of unemployment and terrorism on their lives, the election of Donald Trump, and much, much more. Come, discover a wealth of insights into Arab youth.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you, each one of you, for attending the launch of our 9th annual Arab Youth Survey. Some of you who've been with us for several years know that we have changed the format this year. Every year we do a press conference in the morning and an evening reception for guests and VIPs and stakeholders. This year we said let's, by popular demand, people wanted to come for one event where we talk to the media and to our clients and to all of you here. And I thank you once again for being with us. We're going to, by popular demand again from our panelists today, we're going to run this event very, very efficiently. So the agenda you have with you, we're going to change it a bit, so no more welcome speeches. We're going to go straight to the findings and get to the panel speakers, I'm sure, that all of you have come here to listen to. As the video that just played, most of you are familiar with our survey. All I want to just to get my 2 pounds of the message in. Why do we do this study? We do it because we believe that data and analysis is in short supply in this region, and we do this to bring insights and the survey out there in a public forum. You know, you've got the white paper, the report, which is fairly detailed in its analysis. We spend our own money to be able to put that for free on a public domain. And I think we do that because it is very important for governments, for businesses to understand, who are you communicating to. There is no part in this world that is as young as the Middle East. 60% below the age of 30. 200 million young Arabs. So if anybody has a stake in this region, you've got to understand this demographic, the young people, and that's why we do this for the last 9 years. For many of us in ASDA'A Burson-Marsteller, and especially for me, it's a passion project. It is something we think is of great value to people across the region and in fact across the world. And I can tell you the big positive impact of this is how the world sees the Middle East. I mean, last year, if you're familiar, our top finding is that young Arabs summarily reject the concept of Daesh. And I can tell you there were front pages in Washington Post and The Guardian. It came as a surprise. And I think there's a lot of findings here that will surprise a lot of people as we continue to bring that. And I think it does bring a better understanding of the region. I would like to especially thank the UAE government, who has helped us bring this study every year to the region and to the world. And I would specifically thank His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, who has always been a big support. My colleagues tell me that he has already started tweeting some of the key results that we had shared with him in conference earlier, and which we will share with you today. Based on that, I think we will go straight into the findings, and I would like to invite my colleague Curtis Freet to join me. Curtis Freet is the CEO of Pension Berlin. Some of you know that he's based in the US and he flew down last year, and he did come in yesterday, so he's with us to share the findings of this survey. Can we go to the next slide?
Great. Thank you, Sunil. So my firm, PSB Research, conducted 3,500 face-to-face interviews with Arab youth aged 18 to 24. All the youth are nationals of each of the 16 countries that we polled in, and there was a 50-50 split between males and females. In most instances, as we report the results, we're going to show the results split into 3 geographic regions. Those are the GCC countries, home of the wealthier economies, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman. The Levant, and we also put Yemen in there as well, so that's Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, the Palestinian territories, and Yemen. And then finally North Africa, which was Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, and Tunisia. The interviews were conducted face-to-face at the dates of between February 7th and March 7th, 2017. The respondents were given the opportunity to conduct the interview in either English or Arabic. Generally, we interview 200 people per country. The exceptions to this are in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. We interviewed 300 in each of those countries because they represent the largest economies in the region. We interviewed 250 people in Iraq and then 150 people in the Palestinian territories. And on this slide as well, you can also see, if you have very good eyes, the regions within each country where we conducted the polls. Here we lay out some of the events that shaped the year prior to our interviews, starting with Slovenia, Croatia, and Macedonia closing their borders to refugees in the Middle East in March of 2017. That's up on the upper left. On the lower right, you can see the year wrapping up with the Syrian army recapturing the ancient city of Palmyra from Daesh and the acquittal of President Mubarak in March of 2017. You can also see that at the time we conducted these interviews, Donald Trump had been in the office less than a month, but he had had time to sign his executive order banning citizens from 7 mostly Muslim countries from entering the U.S. That ban, of course, was overturned by the courts, and as was the second ban, which he instituted, which removed Iraq, but still had 6 countries left on there. And I think we believe this is important context for the rest of the survey.
Thank you, Curtis. I think we're going to now share the top 10 findings, and as we always explain every year, this is in no order of importance, so different audiences will find different findings of more relevance. So I want to go to the first finding here, and that is, I'm sorry. The number one finding is that optimism among young Arabs is waning, with a clear split in geographies between what we call the haves and have-nots. And I think to a great extent, this finding has driven the main theme of our finding, which is that hope and despair is defined by where you live, by the geography that you are in. And you will see from the findings, from the next finding, why that finding is critical and important to understand. So here, the finding we have, that it's almost as if there are 2 Middle Easts here. The overall finding is that optimism is down. 1 in 2 Arabs, that's 52%, think that their country in general is going in the right direction. 45% up a bit from 31 feel they're going in the wrong direction. That's the overall sample. But when you dive a little deeper, look at how different regions look at the same question. you see the geography splits there, which is the pie charts. 85% of the young Arabs in the Gulf think their country is going in the right direction. And in the bottom pie chart, the Levant and Yemen, the same percentage, 85% think they're going in the wrong direction. So when you look at it, you know, especially the outside world look at the Middle East in this broad brush approach, saying the Middle East is this swath of 22 countries that look at things differently. But honestly, when you look at it, GCC, Levant, North Africa, we're fairly distinct in terms of how the young people are looking. And that's where we would like you to appreciate those changes. Moving forward, when you look at the finding, when we ask the question, are your best days ahead of you or your best days behind you? Look at, last year people were much more positive. 71% of the overall sample said our best days are ahead. But there's been a drop, 58, nearly 13 percentage points. But again, when you look at the geography splits, 78% in the Gulf said were much, much more optimistic, best days ahead of them. But again, in the Levant and Yemen, 66% feel that their best days are behind them. And that, I mean, we're talking to young people in the age group of 18 to 24. Their default setting is to be positive, about hopeful. And when these large amounts of people in these countries are looking at their future and say, my best days are behind, that should be worrying for a lot of policymakers in government and also for businesses, because this is the audience we are actually looking at. When you move ahead and ask them questions about the economy, is your economy going in the right direction or wrong direction? Again, the regional splits, 82% feel that their economy is going in the right direction, and in the Levant and Yemen, 78%. Think about it. The sample, as Curtis mentioned, the Levantine sample is Iraq, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. And in that sample, we have Yemen as well. So, you're looking at fairly depressed economies in that particular grouping. Moving on to the next finding. Here we are looking at, our finding is that young Arabs want their countries to do more for them, and many feel overlooked by policymakers. When we ask the question, how strongly do you agree or disagree with the statement, my country should better address the needs of the youth? Clearly, 81% felt they should. I mean, that's an obvious answer. Again, across the three regions, we see a similar need for governments, that young people want their governments to address their needs. But when we dug a little deeper and asked the question, do you think your government is having the right policies addressed to the youth? 57% said yes. But when you look at the geography splits, the GCC governments have an 86% yes vote, where obviously the government is putting a lot of schemes to get youth employed, to encourage them for entrepreneurship. But when you look at the Levant and Yemen, 74% of that sample feel overlooked. Kind of middling answer from North Africa. Again, we are seeing that divide between two different groups. And that's the theme that is kind of overall across this study, is that Middle East is more and more becoming a region divided, and I think one needs to look at this region and look at policies that make sense for the GCC, while the policies that make sense for the Levant and North Africa. Curtis, yeah.
Great, thanks, Sunil. Sunil was just talking about some areas where there's disagreement between the regions. Here are areas where there tends to be more agreement than disagreement, particularly that unemployment and extremism are the biggest problems holding the Middle East back. When we asked young Arabs, what do you believe is the biggest obstacle facing the Middle East, three issues share almost the exact same proportion for the answers. First is unemployment, second, the rise of Daesh, and third, the threat of terrorism. The finding on Daesh is interesting because last year this was way out in front with 50% citing it as the biggest threat. And what a difference a year makes. They've come down. What's also interesting is that unemployment and the threat of terrorism generally have remained about the same. So the difference between this year and last year is that the threat of Daesh has dropped from 50%, and now it's basically tied with unemployment. While concern about Daesh has fallen, concern about unemployment has increased since 2016, with more than half of young Arabs saying they're worried about the job situation. So 51% say they're very concerned about unemployment, which is up from 42% last year. Concerns about unemployment are particularly acute in Iraq, where 69% of young people are concerned about unemployment, and then we can see Algeria, Bahrain, Palestinian territories, and Lebanon follow behind them. Not only are they concerned about unemployment, but only half have confidence in their governments to address the issue. 51% say that they have confidence in their country, which is a small drop from last year at 53%. And young people in Lebanon and Iraq are the least confident in their government's ability to address the issue at 19% and 24% respectively. So finding number 4 is related to unemployment. We also found that many young Arabs say their education system falls short of preparing students for jobs of the future. So what do we mean by that? When we looked at jobs of the future, we used the definition that was identified at the inaugural Global Manufacturing and Industrial Summit held in Abu Dhabi in March. And that definition is those jobs that will require significant technology skills replacing the traditional manufacturing jobs that are increasingly being automated. So when we talk about jobs of the future, it's the high-skilled jobs that are replacing manufacturing jobs. Outside of the GCC, very few people think the education system prepares students for jobs of the future. 2/3 of the youth in North Africa and in Levant and Yemen are dissatisfied with the preparation of students for jobs of the future. And per a theme we're seeing all throughout this report, in the GCC, 80% of youth think their education is, in fact, preparing them for these new roles. So once again, the GCC states are an outlier.
Although that enthusiasm is realistic, because I think generally the GCC nationals, young nationals, are over enthusiastic about everything, but the education system, I think, is still something to be looked at, even in the GCC, though outlook is very positive. Yeah.
The quality of education is also increasingly a concern for young Arabs across the region. 35% of young Arabs say they were very concerned about the quality of education in their country this year. That's up 7 points from 2016. So we can see this as a major concern, although not to diminish these issues. I suppose in some ways it's good to see the concerns about terrorism and Daesh fall to the point of where it's equal with concerns about unemployment and education.
Okay, moving swiftly on to the 5th finding, I think this is related to Daesh. It was our top finding last year, but clearly I think there's more and more young people think Daesh is getting weaker, especially over the past 12 months. When we ask the question of, categorize whether they're stronger or weaker, 31% still felt they are stronger, but 61%, a fairly important group, said they are weaker. And the countries that are more likely to say that who are weaker are Iraq, Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories, while those who thought they were getting stronger are from Libya, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia. When we ask the question, how concerned are you about Daesh, the very concern has actually fallen from 44 in 2015 to 50% in 2016 to 36%. And correlated to that, when we ask the question, are you confident that your governments can handle or deal with the rise of Daesh? Again, that has increased, 47 to 53 in 2016 and 58% in 2017. So clearly young people have more confidence that the governments are able to handle this. And then finally we ask the question, what do you think are the top priorities in the fight against Daesh? And here is a very interesting answer. Of course, military action is the top priority, but equally important are educational reform and creating more jobs. And I think that's an important finding, that military action alone will not be able to tackle this problem. Moving swiftly on to the sixth finding, I think a lot of people in this room will find it very interesting, and that is the UAE sprints ahead of the pack as the country in which most young Arabs would like to live and want their countries to emulate. I think this is one of the findings that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed tweeted this morning as well. But just to look at the numbers here, quite surprising. Look at the big spurt of support for the UAE as a country that young Arabs want to live in, from 22% last year to 35%, a 13 percentage point. But look at it, it's almost double than where people, than USA, you know, as most people as an aspirational place for people to go. And then you have Saudi Arabia, Canada, and Germany in terms of, so there's been some, you know, Canada has moved up, Saudi Arabia has moved up, Germany has gone a bit down. I think the UK was there last time, has disappeared from the top 5 list. But again, to go back to the UAE, I think for the sixth consecutive year, UAE has stayed there as the place that young Arabs want to live in. When we ask the question, which country would you like your country to emulate, to be like? Again, the UAE stood out as the #1 choice. Again, a big spurt from 23 to 36%, 13 percentage points. But again, much more favored than the US, than Canada, Germany, and Saudi Arabia. I think that's a very important finding. When we asked, you know, why is the UAE the choice? I mean, what are the key phrases that you link the UAE with? Look at that, so simple. You know, safety and security. Second, have a growing economy, and they have a whole range of jobs. And I think that's an interesting way to look at how young people look at their lives. They want a job, they want to start a family, they want a home to start in. But there are some good positives, you know, the high quality of education system, a good place to raise the family, easy to start a business, welcoming to and friendly to expats, respects cultural traditions, and of course it's tax-free. But there are some negatives as well, you know, expensive, yeah? I mean, they're difficult to get a residency visa. So those are some of the things that Arab youth think. Moving on to the 7th finding, to Curtis.
Great, thank you. So looking a little further afield, let's look at specifically about how young Arabs feel about the United States. Perhaps not surprisingly, young Arabs say Donald Trump is anti-Muslim, and they express concern, anger, and fear about his presidency. Arab youth regard Donald Trump's victory as more important and more consequential to the region than rising oil prices and Daesh losing territory. When asked which of the following developments that took place in 2016 do you think will have the biggest impact on the Arab world over the next 5 years, 25% of young Arabs picked Donald Trump's electoral win. 18% chose crude oil prices beginning to increase, and 15% chose Daesh losing territory in Iraq and Syria. We also asked young Arabs which word, if any, best describes how you feel about Donald Trump's presidency, and gave them a list to choose from. The list was an even mix of positive and negative words, so we weren't biasing the response in any way. And almost 2/3 chose one of the negative words, the top ones being concern, anger, and fear. Only 19% chose a positive word, such as excited, optimistic, or hopeful. And 5 in 6 young Arabs view Donald Trump unfavorably, making him the least popular of the 3 U.S. presidents so far in the 21st century among young Arabs. 52% are unfavorable towards Barack Obama, 77% were unfavorable towards George W. Bush, but 83% are unfavorable toward Donald Trump. So why is Donald Trump so unpopular? It might be because an overwhelming majority of young Arabs think Trump is anti-Muslim. In fact, across the region as a whole, 70% think he's anti-Muslim, which probably shouldn't surprise anybody. I'm actually a little surprised by the 30% who didn't think he was anti-Muslim. Those most likely to agree that Trump is anti-Muslim are from Qatar with 87%, Saudi Arabia 84%, Oman 79%, and Iraq, Egypt, and the UAE all at 78%. Half of young Arabs, 49% to be exact, say Trump's travel ban will make it easier for terror groups to recruit young Muslims through, and though a similar number, 47%, don't think it will. So they're kind of split on this one. When we look at the country split here, though, 68% of youth in the UAE and Egypt believe it's going to help, 56% in Yemen, 55% in Qatar, and 53% in Saudi Arabia and Iraq. So what impact is this having on the views of America among Arab youth? So our eighth finding is that anti-American views are actually on the rise, and now Russia, not the US, is seen as the region's top international ally. Here we see that the UAE and Saudi Arabia have consistently been seen as the region's biggest allies, with the UAE just inching out Saudi Arabia at 36% this year. And this year, almost from out of nowhere, Russia has replaced the US as the top non-Arab ally. By nowhere, I mean they don't appear in the top 5 list for the last 5 years. It's just been this year where they've leaped up into the number 3 position. In fact, only 9% of young Arabs chose Russia as their country's top ally in 2016, and that's more than doubled in 1 year. The US, on the other hand, is seeing its perceived influence among young Arabs decline. The number of those seeing America as their biggest ally has fallen by 8 points, from 25% in 2016 to 17% in 2017. The decline in the US as a perceived ally coincides with a rise in anti-American views. In eight Muslim majority countries now this year, a majority of youth now consider the US an enemy rather than an ally. Overall, more young Arabs today view the US as an enemy than as a friend, at 49% against 46% as a friend. And this year, Qatar, Libya, Algeria, and Egypt joined Iraq, Yemen, the Palestinian territories, and Lebanon as countries where the majority of youth see the US as an enemy. So, while the survey shows a perceived decline in US political influence in the region, it is still true that the US remains young Arabs' second choice for the country they'd like to live in, and their second choice for the country they would like their country to emulate, behind the UAE in both cases. So this suggests that it would probably be wrong to conclude that young Arabs dislike American society or Americans, or think that America itself is anti-Arab. I think their concerns are more about US foreign policy and the leaders who make that policy.
Thank you. We're going to run through the other 2 findings very, very swiftly. If you can go back to the main slide. I think the question we asked here is that, do you think Arabic language, is important for you? And the finding is that despite the pride that young Arabs have in the Arabic language, most young Arabs say they're using English more in their daily lives. And I think that's an important finding, especially for governments that focus on making sure that the Arabic language can... So the question was, do you think Arabic is central to your identity? 80% felt yes, and that's across the three geographies. But when we asked them, do you think Arabic is losing its value? Consistent drop from 47% who said, we agree that it's losing value, to 57% in 16 and to 60% in 2017. And across the 3 regions, we see almost a similar feeling that Arabic is losing value. And when we ask further on a daily basis, do you use English more than Arabic? And look at that, overall sample, 54%. But in the GCC, nearly 70% young Arabs use English more than Arabic. And I think that is something that governments in the region should be looking at, especially if we want to preserve the Arabic identity. And finally, I think an interest to a lot of our media friends here, how do young people consume media? And here's something which shouldn't be surprising, but when you look at the numbers, they are surprising. That Facebook has become the #1 medium for daily news. When you look at it, you know, how often do you go to get news from Facebook? 35%. Reading news online, 31%. And for the first time, Facebook has trumped television. TV channels, just 30%, and newspaper coming there at 9%. When you ask them, how often do you use Facebook to share interesting news? In this year, it's almost 64%. So the dominance of Facebook in this region, of course, Twitter is popular in Saudi Arabia, but when you look at Facebook's dominance across the region, it's unbelievable. Look at that. How often do you visit each of the following on a daily basis? Facebook, 68%. WhatsApp, 68% again. So between Facebook and WhatsApp, I think they've got the minds of young people. YouTube, of course, you know, increased substantially to 50%. Instagram, again, a lot popular among Arabs. And Snapchat, come from nowhere, captured to 42% of the minds of people. And then you have Twitter coming at the end at 47. I think, without doubt, Facebook, WhatsApp, and the smartphone has truly revolutionized how young people live their lives, much more in the digital space. So those are the top 10 findings we have. Just as a quick snapshot, you know, the first 2 findings were more about how they see the future, the optimism. And clearly we've seen a drop. Having said that, geographies look at it differently. The GCC are overwhelmingly positive, but the Levant and Yemen are pretty depressed. The next 2 findings was more about unemployment being the key thing and jobs being the real ask of young people, that education system are not matching what the jobs of the future. Then, of course, the finding about Daesh, that, you know, Daesh is become weaker and governments are able to handle that much more strongly. The UAE sprints ahead this year as the model country that young people want to live in. 7th finding and 8 were more about foreign policy and foreign affairs. And then Donald Trump, not surprisingly, is seen as anti-Muslim, and the rise of the rise of Russia as the #1 non-Arab ally. And the last 2 findings about use of language and the fall to a great extent of the use of Arabic, and of course, how do young people consume media. So those are 10 findings. We have a white paper, which I'm sure all of you can look at. There's some commentary from think tank people and experts from across the world who've commented on those findings, so you'll find that very, very interesting. I'd like to go straight into the panel discussion and invite, thank you, Curtis, for, yeah. If you want to add anything? Final notes?
No,
Thank
we're
you.
good. Let's move on.
Thank you. We go straight into the panel discussion. I'd like to invite our panel speakers here. We'd like, first of all, Her Excellency Sheikha Hanadi bint Nasser Al Thani is renowned for her entrepreneurial spirit and leadership. She's the founder and chairperson of Amwal, founder and CEO of Al Wab City Real Estate Development Project, and the vice chair of Nasser bin Khalid Al Thani and Sons Group, and the founding chairperson of Q Auto. A round of applause for Sheikha Hanadi. Next up, His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Alabar, who all of you know is a global entrepreneur with active interests in real estate, in retail, in luxury hospitality, and now in e-commerce and technology. Next up, that all of you are very familiar with, Mr. Fadi Gandour is a co-founder and executive chairman of Vamda and the managing partner of Vamda Capital. All of you know him as the founder and the ex-vice chairman of Aramex. We are really happy to have Fadi Gandour with us. And last but not the least, Mr. Roy Haddad, who's the director of WPP for the MENA region. He has been in the communication industry across the world as well as in the region for the last 3 decades, and he oversees WPP, which has over 5,000 people across the MENA region. And I'd like to now hand over to the moderator of the panel discussion, Mr. Ala Shaheen, who, as some of you may know, is the team leader for political and economic news for the MENA region for Bloomberg News. Over to you, Ala.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'd like first to discuss how we're going to run this panel. We're going to talk to our guests first on the most interesting findings, discuss a little bit. Then I'm going to start actually going to the floor with some questions, and then we'll make it interactive between you and me. First of all, I'd like to ask our speakers about the most interesting or surprising findings that you found in the survey. And Mr. Abbar, I'm going to begin with you because I know you have a flight to catch, so please.
I think the dwindling effect of the Arabic language was a surprise for me. Again, the high rating that the UAE got, it's much higher than I thought. These are the two. There's no surprises in the rest of it.
The rest keeps coming up in every survey.
Yeah, I think it reflects reality.
Sheikh Hanadi.
I agree with Mr. Al-Abbar. It is a reflection of reality. Every part of the survey actually was very interesting for me. I think what concerns me is that we're still speaking about unemployment, and this is the major concern of the Arab youth. And I think the pessimism of our youth and their look to the future, their pessimistic look to the future was concerning.
Okay. Mr. Ghandour?
So I have three issues that I think are not necessarily surprising, but need a little bit more discussion maybe, and then that's maybe we have this panel. So the idea when the number 3 issue around unemployment, it's tied to extremism here, but let's talk about unemployment. So the discussion around that question is the feeling of what do you think governments are doing for them? So what is the private sector doing? Where is that question? What is civil society doing? Is this a societal issue, or are we always going to throw the responsibility of development and our youth on government alone? So what do people like us, because you have a private sector panel here. So that's one issue that I think needs to be highlighted, needs to be dug into. We need to know much more about what is their view of the societal responsibility rather than only government. So, I mean, I have an issue with only asking them about what do they think about government. Number 2 is the biggest issue, I think, here that can be the thread that ties across all the questions and the findings is the education issue. They continuously tell us, and this is the youth, tell us we are not learning what the job market requires of us today and in the future. So, I mean, when will this question stop becoming a continuous and recurring issue for us? So we, the older generation, think that's an issue. It's more worrying for me when a young man or woman in the Arab world says, I am not learning anything that is required in the market. I mean, that's really depressing. And that requires another set of questions. Is it government? Is it private sector? Are we giving them the right direction in what they should study, or is it a curriculum issue? Again, we need to dig deeper into it. I have a big issue with your number 9, which Mr. Muhammad Al-Abbar mentioned. I think the 9th question about Arabic being worried about the Arabic language does not stand, in my view, to the science that I see in the digital space. Arabs are reading in Arabic, will only read in Arabic, and will not respond and will not engage unless it's in Arabic. If you follow Twitter, if you follow Facebook, which is a conclusion here, everybody engages in Arabic. We need to dig deeper into the methodology of what the question was. Because I'll tell you, even in e-commerce today, they tell us if I am publishing something in Arabic, people will buy. If it's in English, they won't even read it. So there's a disconnect here, and that was, if you want, a big surprise for me. I think Arabic is actually resurgent online because of the digital space. On Facebook, they only talk in Arabic, they don't talk in English. It's only me that talks in English, probably, and this panel, but Arabs are talking in Arabic.
Actually, that was my big surprise also, the Arabic language. But I would define it slightly differently from how Fadi puts it, and I agree with him. That one, I don't think there is enough content, but the worrying part about the Arabic is a reflection of another attitude. Is about identity. And I will take it on that identity, which then is understood about the unemployment, about government letting the youth down, about not creating enough jobs. And therefore, it's really a more summing up of the Arab identity itself, rather than purely the Arabic language, which we'll come back to later on.
Okay, very good. And just a point on the Arabic language, I agree with Mr. Ghandour said also, because maybe 10 years ago, the biggest problem in the online sphere was the lack of Arabic content. They would tell you, why do you don't get ad revenue for your business? Because there's no Arabic content. Now it's changing a bit.
But there is still not enough content.
It's improving rather than...
And Ala, if you follow, on YouTube, U-Turn, Kharabish, Telfaz 11, on Twitter, the tweets in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, on Facebook, it is only Arabic. I mean, and if the survey is telling us that people are engaging and socializing through the digital space, so where's the disconnect? I don't know. That needs to be looked at. So the billions of views are in Arabic, not in English.
I'd like to move to the issue that we discuss almost every year, which is unemployment. We know the stats, we know the problem, we've discussed it for the past 10 years. And Ms. Labar, I'd like to begin with you. I mean, we know that we have a youth bulge, and we keep getting these warnings every year with the IMF. Is it too late to fix it before we reach a real crisis? Is what being done is enough? And if not, then why?
Well, of course, you have to keep in mind that this unemployment issue is an issue in America, is an issue in South America, is an issue in China and India. So it's not a strange subject, and I think it's just in our region, unfortunately, institutions and government have not really managed well. They don't have the discipline to manage well, otherwise we will not be where we are today. And I don't believe in oil or no oil, because I think we have many great examples in South America or in Southeast Asia, where really you've got a great organization and countries where they're doing so well and there was no oil income. So it's all about management. And then unfortunately sometimes I would say the management, of course here I mean government, incapable, sometimes capable, don't understand the detailed issues, sometimes they don't have the discipline. And really, for you to really sort a subject like this, besides if you love your people as a leader, or if you are passionate, but you have to have the knowledge, you have to have the right people around you. If you're a prime minister or if you are a president, you have to have the discipline to make sure, because this is a 15-year plan. You cannot fix education in 1 week or 2 weeks. But at the same time, if education was fine, I think it would really reflect in the house, and that's, as you all spoke about, the responsibility of the business community to contribute. I really think the greatest contribution is the mother and the father, and again, when the mother and the father are really properly, reasonably educated, I think the effect of that is so huge, and we see it with our kids. So we as parents with good education, we are qualified to engage and look after our kids and direct them properly and educate them. So I think it goes back to the education. But what really worries me most? What worries me most, I agree that we're all worldwide, we're all complaining about the education. Even the Americans are complaining about education, but they don't have 25% unemployment. They have 4.2 unemployment. But what worries me in the Middle East is that those who can manage, and they are middle income, upper middle income, they send their kids to private schools. So they're always safe, which means that they'll get good education, they'll be able to contribute moving forward. But my worry is that lower income, which is 80%, 85% of society, they go to government education system, which means that just keep pushing them lower and lower in society. So, well, I guess a lot of private schooling going on, but unfortunately they're too costly for the normal human being. So at the end of the day, I don't like to blame government a lot. It's true, we have to contribute as well. But when it comes to education, I mean, why are you in government if you cannot manage? It's your, I mean, education, defense, foreign policy, that's really infrastructure, that's really your business. So unfortunately, government have failed over a long period of time to really manage this sector and put a passionate plan that really, and I have no doubt all governments are passionate about their people, but do they know how to do it? And that's a big challenge for all of us.
Okay, you mentioned unemployment is a global issue, but this region has one of the highest, if not the highest, youth unemployment rates in the world. Second thing, when you talk about fixing education as a long-term problem, like it takes 15 years to fix education, but are we starting 15 years too late? I mean, shouldn't we have started 30 years ago, 15 years ago, when oil was more than $100 a barrel?
Yes, I agree that we are late. But the good news is that with a lot of governments in the region who are really highlighting this issue, and they're putting plan for education. I like the change that's taking place in Saudi Arabia. I like the plans that we see in the UAE. There's a lot happening in Qatar, in Kuwait, some of the countries in North Africa. I really think promoting the concept and putting the plans, I think it motivates other governments to do better. It motivates other governments and put them under pressure, especially that digitally we're all connected. So that's really, I mean, worse come to worse, at least promoting good policies. People are thinking of serious plans. And the good news, with this digital connectivity of people, I think governments are under a lot of pressure to perform. And I hope that put them under pressure to really do something about this. And I agree, we are late.
Sheikh Hanadi, what's your take on this? Because again, you raised this when we talked before.
Well, actually, I'm frustrated. We've been discussing the issue of youth unemployment in forums for the last, I think, 15 years. We've been speaking about what the government's role is, and it's very clear that the government is not the only responsible agent within this situation. I think today, even after governments launching policies, governments starting to reform their education, we haven't caused a dent in the door of unemployment in front of the youth. And I disagree with Mr. Al-Abbar. If we're speaking about unemployment for the people at a later stage, it's easier to speak about. But we're speaking about youngsters who are first-time job seekers within the Arab world that cannot find a job. They cannot find the means to live a good life, to start with just providing their own amenities to live. So that just differentiates the situation that we are in. Add to the point that we have high unemployment within women. We have, within the Arab world, we have different participation levels of women in the workforce. We have as low as 17% in Algeria, and in some cases as high as 53% in Qatar. So there are a lot of problems that are systematic. The solution does not lie with the government. They cannot, we haven't, with everything that has happened, it doesn't stop there. It's a question of what the private sector is doing, how can civil society help, how can we shift the mindset of our youth in thinking that it's not only the government that will provide them with a job, it is them seeking employment elsewhere and creating it by themselves in a lot of places.
Mr. Randour, you wanted to follow up on this?
Yes, so I think late or not too late, I think in the digital space we're not too late because the digital space allows us to leapfrog. So if you had asked me 15 years ago if we had known what we are going to teach our kids or what are the kids going to learn in schools and universities, I wouldn't have predicted what was going to happen today. All right? Most of the revolutions in technology are not 10 years old today. So if you asked 15 years ago, they wouldn't know. So maybe it's not, it's not too late if we address the issue, obviously. And the digital space puts us in a conundrum because it moves so fast and it changes so fast so that you really need to be in an education system that teaches a state of mind of continuous learning.
Fadi, here even, I mean, you try to approach government and to say, listen, education online, we want you to certify I mean, we all have to work so hard to convince them that this is the way the world is going, and they're going to do it. I'm not saying they're not going to do it, but still, at the end of the day, that's the thing that we have to deal with.
100%, but I would sideline government in today's world and say, even the digital world is letting youth move forward beyond the formal education system. They are pulling knowledge from the internet today. They are not waiting for anyone. It's not only about the online learning systems, it's about everything that they are pulling. So life in education is around pull, not push. You can't shove knowledge into people's faces anymore because they have a choice and they can go and learn and get whatever they want to do. So that challenge for government is, again, it ties to the Daesh issue. Because we're also asked, what is Daesh benefiting from leapfrogging the formal education system and by finding whatever they want to, or by producing whatever they want to online? So educators need to stand in front of all of us and say, what are we doing? What are we doing? Why are our youth giving us such a low mark? But it is the education system that needs to say, why did we fail our youth? Because it's them that are being, this is about them, about educators who their graduates are saying, you failed us.
What's frustrating actually is when you look at the cost per student in the government system. I've looked at that in Lebanon, for example. It's $6,000 per annum. A very good private school in Lebanon is $6,000. However, the level of education is different. And we go back to bad management. That's one aspect. The other aspect, I think, is the curriculum. And that also linked to the Arabic language that we find, because when you have a curriculum that didn't move for practically 40 to 50 years, my kids read in the same book practically that I read. That's not logic. To go back to your issue of new economy and so on. We really need to relook at our curriculum, relook at how we're spending our money in the government, particularly for the have-not in the schooling system, because it's unfair that every student costs the cost of a private school, however he doesn't get the right education. There is a management issue around that we need to look at very hard.
But isn't one of the issues, and I speak perhaps also from my experience in the region, and I want to follow up on a point that you raised about how it's morally towards the privileged, but also towards the bright. You have to be, even when you do on the digital side, it seems to me that you have to be very bright or very wealthy to have, and you'll have a better chance of success, whereas on the average level, you don't get the opportunity to actually succeed because the education system, because of the curriculum doesn't really cater to your needs, right? Is that correct?
I really think it's a combination of all. I mean, even if you give me a good education system and I have the opportunity, but is the government putting good government economic policies that this environment is vibrant and I can participate in it and I have a chance to do something that's really, that contributes? So I think it's a combination of all. Is that what's happening to the economy? Do you really have good private sector? You've got good economic policy, that way we all can grow and participate and all that. So the truth is that it's a combination of all. The only thing that I would like to say is that I really like what Fadi said, is that, it's amazing how much information they can pull, and maybe soon we don't need all these certificates because the brain is so much full of so much power of information that you take in. But at the same time, going to the point of the private education, I'm very close to private educators. They suck the life out of the fees. I mean, normal human beings can't pay this thing.
As a parent, I agree.
I don't know if education should really be private. I mean, I know that private has good discipline, but some of these fees, how can a normal human being can pay like this? So it hurts me that the guy needs most help, who cannot afford to pay even 2,000 dirham. He's the guy we need to help. The guy who can pay 50,000 dirham, honestly, I don't care. He can send his kids to London even if he wish. But what about this guy who have 7 kids and can't even pay 1,000 riyal? This is where the pain is.
Okay, Mr. Abbar, I know, just to hold 1 second, I know you have a plane to catch We'd love to have you more if you can.
We're keeping here. The plane can wait.
If you can wait, that would be great.
Okay, let's stay a little bit.
Stay for a little bit. Okay.
This guy is dangerous.
I know his secrets.
Okay, so I want to move on to
one statistic that's interesting.
Okay.
I need to mention that. So in Jordan, the public schools, to Muhammad Al-Abbar's point, the public schools are overwhelmed with new entrants this year because parents cannot afford private schools anymore. So this is the dwindling of the middle class. So the mother and the father are saying, I'm going to send you to a public school because, sorry, I cannot even afford the lowest cost private school.
Interesting.
And it needs to be discussed.
And what I want to tell you is that when I was living in Singapore, I remember my best friend, because his daughter was accepted in high school, public school, they had a celebration that night. That how reversed it was. Very easy to go to private, but for her to be accepted in high school, to enter high school, public school, government of Singapore managed, there was a huge celebration in the neighborhood. Why can't we do that? And who's responsible for all that?
Okay, I'd like to move to... I'd like to move to another finding, and the question here is to Sheikh Hanadi. Okay, on the face of it, it sounds like good news. Daesh as a threat is seen receding, and because of the, they're losing territories in Syria, Iraq, and Jordan. At the same time, the youth says, the young Arabs will say, unemployment is one of the main drivers for recruitment for Daesh. So it sounds like the threat is receding temporarily, because if you don't tackle the jobs problem, you're going to replace Daesh with another name, just like Daesh replaced Al-Qaeda.
Absolutely. They've been saying that. They've been saying that on, in previous reports. They've been saying unemployment leads to all the harms that we are seeing in the Arab world. They've been saying unemployment is one of their biggest disadvantages or opportunities lost. So, what's surprising about it? We know that radicalism has spurred in the Arab world because of lacks of hope, of dignity. How could you expect someone who does not provide, have a good paying job, does not have a good life, at least be able to live within his own needs, how do you expect him to be optimistic? If he's pessimistic, of course, anyone can radicalize him. So it doesn't come as a surprise. But the thing that is very positive, it shows you what positive media has done over the last 2 years. It shows you that, the use of media to inform the youth about what happens on radical, I remember all of the comic aspects that Saudi Arabia had on their TV about that. It paid back. It showed that there is more understanding of Daesh, more understanding of what radical Islam, radical people bring to you.
Mr. Haddad, since you're in the media.
I think I'm still very concerned because of 3 elements. Yes, there has been a lot of activity in preventing and countering Daesh, which have basically yielding results. However, if you look at the underlying of that, which concerns me, the Arabic language lack of use, which is about identity. And radicalism is feed on low identity because people want it. When you look at, obviously, the unemployment and the optimism, the lowering of optimism, when you look at all these 3 elements outside of how people feel about Daesh, I would be very concerned about the future and how we tackle that. Because if you add identity, culture, and unemployment and economy, then the 3 elements are a perfect storm. And these need to be addressed very quickly.
Mr. Hamdoul, you want to...
So, I think this Daesh thing is overblown. With all due respect, I think Daesh thrives
in... It's not Daesh, it's more radical thinking rather than
I'm responding to the survey, not to you. I agree with you. But I basically think this is... I don't see Daesh overwhelming countries with governments that have proper governance. Daesh thrives in 4 failed states in the region: Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya. So let's not generalize the rest of the Arab world on these failed states. There are successful, relatively successful states. They have challenges in the region. I don't see Daesh walking down the street in Amman as a worry for me, or downtown in Beirut, nor definitely here in Dubai.
But they
pose
security.
I mean, let us put it in perspective. Yes, we're worried about it. We dislike its ideology. It is worrying. But this tells us when states are governing well, they protect us from Daesh, and society protects itself from Daesh. When government is failed and failed miserably, then that's where we need to worry.
My comments on this, I really think you should just stop for a minute. India has 200 Muslims, right? 200 million Muslims, I apologize. 200 million Muslims. And the Arab world, whatever, we're 240, 250. I don't know how many people from India are in Daesh. Why?
Maybe have more French.
Has to do with, of course, economic opportunities and all that. I totally agree with it. But I'm going to tell you that 200 Muslims in India, they're really very poor, by the way. So I think it's again, it goes back to education and religious education. And the religious education is an influence of who is teaching what is such a big concern, and spreading hatred and right or wrong messages. So please think about the 200 million in India. Why are they not participating in Daesh? And you will know the reason. It's all about religious education.
But is it a coincidence?
Thank you.
Is it a coincidence that Daesh rose, okay, albeit in those failed states or states with problems, in Anbar in Iraq, highest poverty rate, highest unemployment in 2014 before the rise of Daesh. In Syria, the civil war started as a drought, or started, one of the reasons was because of the drought in the peripheries region. Isn't that also a major factor? Obviously, the education is significant, and maybe that's why we see a security threat from Daesh in a country like Saudi Arabia, where it's a strong government and a strong economy. But isn't the economic part significant as well?
I'm saying the economic part, I'm sure it has an effect, but more important, I mean, economic part, look at all the villages in Egypt. You know, I do business in Egypt. I go to all these little villages where there is a house without a roof, and we fix some of these roofs, some we can, some we can't. But you don't have these people turning that way. I really think that economic issues is an issue, but I believe it's religious education that really drives these young people into that direction, my humble views.
Sheikh Hanadi, what do you think of this?
I agree. I think the economic issue is a part of the situation. Education, awareness of what's happening, opportunity, just optimism in life. And I agree with that. You know, we do, you know, reading the report, looking at pessimism, looking at the identity question, and looking at the rise of any kind of radical movement is a scary thing. But I think we'll always have radical movements. If Daesh goes, something else comes. And this is why we saw previously it was Al-Qaeda in the previous reports. Now we have Daesh. I think, you know, providing opportunity, providing hope with better awareness to what's happening around you is the case. But, you know, let's remember that we're speaking about a generation that has so much knowledge that can be networked very easily, that understand much more than what we understand. So I'm actually positive. I think that this is a positive point, the decline of their, you know, the influence of them. And I think we're going to see more positive as it comes.
Okay, I'd like to open the floor for questions. Please state your name.
I thought I'll ask you permission to leave.
Okay, sure. We'd like to have you more, but we know that you have a flight. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed Al-Abbad.
If you come ahead.
So now, some questions from the floor. Please state your name, affiliation, so that we can find you afterwards. Please keep the question to the point and as short as possible. Please, the lady in the third row.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lian Khatib. I'm a spokesperson from Nestle Middle East. I rather have a comment on the youth unemployment. Last year, we have, as Nestle, we identified our role in society and the role that, as a corporation, we want to play to contribute to solutions. While, of course, nutrition is the core of what we do, one key commitment is towards youth in the region. And we launched an alliance for youth last year. Earlier this year, we have on board 9 partners from in the UAE Ministry of Youth and Sports, Nielsen, Publicis, Middle East, Muhibbi Logistics, AUD, you name it. And I think the comment here is that it's true to your point, Mr. Ghandour, everyone has a role to play. And for us, the best way we thought is really to call out anyone who's here, any company, anyone who really wants to play a role, to join the alliance. We also have measures. We want to hire, as an alliance, 3,000 youth and impact 50,000. So yes, there are a role everyone wants to play, but we cannot amplify it just on our own. So I really invite you all.
Thank you, thank you. But I'd like, please, to stick to questions in the coming ones. Please refrain from making statements, if possible. That lady there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nahila, and I'm the communication for Bayersdorf, Middle East. I just want to ask regarding education. Mr. Al-Abbar, before he left, he said that basically government, they don't know maybe how to do it. But if you have really good examples in private schools, why don't we just learn from private schools and apply it on governmental schools?
Is it directed to a specific member of the panel?
Mr. Fadi, I would like Mr. Fadi to answer.
My answer is, let's copy the people that have done it, okay? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Singaporeans and Koreans have produced an incredible education system that gets their kids to participate in the future of their economies. They have a holistic approach. It's an approach for learning rather than for education. And they involve private sector, they get them in, they tell them what are the jobs that you need for the next 5 or 10 years, and then they go back and produce an education system that matches the needs. We don't do that. I can tell you from my life as a CEO of a large company in the region, I have spent very little time with public educators asking me a question, Fadi, what are the jobs that you need? All right. Number 2, I can tell you, I am less and less interested in college degrees. If somebody comes to me and says, I have a college degree, that's interesting, but I want to know your character. I want to know who you are, what have you done in your life, and then I look at which university you went to and what you studied. They are behind because they need to learn. Educators need to be educated about what's happening in the 21st century. It's expensive. It takes a lot of effort. They don't do it.
But if I may, on the public schooling, there is another issue because I engage a lot on the same ground. And one of the excuses I'm always given is we as government have to provide schooling in vast areas. And therefore, by spreading ourselves too thin, the level drops, which I think is a lot of bull. Because I don't think there is any single parent who don't put a couple of extra miles for a well-consolidated educational system.
I want to follow up with Sheikh Hanadi just before one more question. Because you mentioned at the beginning that you don't think the government, or maybe I heard wrongly, but you think it's not perhaps a government role in that, it's more on the private sector in the matter of education?
No, I said it's a partnership. It's a partnership between 3. I actually agree with the comments that have been stated, but I think that the requirements of the market of the future, the economy of the future, really depends on skills that are going to be more than what we learn in school. I think what's very promising is that I see today a lot of e-learning on the web, skills that can be provided through internet learning that are provided in Arabic as well, as to Fadi's point, on the web. This can help a bit with elevating our workforce, elevating the skills of our workforce. In the Gulf, we have reformed our education. We have started, we are not there yet, we have started to reform our education. And I think we are at a better situation than some of the other Arab countries. But it is a matter of a discussion, as Fadi said it. It's a discussion between what the private sector needs, what the economy needs as new jobs for the future, the new labor force, and what we are providing. And we're far off from that, I agree.
I'll take one more question now.
Sorry, I had a question.
Please.
Okay.
Go ahead now.
My name is Laura Abdelmalak. I'm from Al-Iqtisad wal-A'mal magazine. My question is twofold. One on education. I mean, the youth that feel that they're not being that well educated or they're afraid about their future. Are they college graduates? Are they university graduates? Maybe the issue isn't in, the junior education. Maybe the issue is when they do get into universities, are they being prepared for the job market? And second of all, when we talk about unemployment, I mean, if we look at the GCC countries, most of the youth in the GCC will not take any job, okay? So how much is it unemployment, really unemployment? I mean, when they will only accept jobs out of a certain level or of a certain criteria. And what do you have to say about that?
I think the second part is a great question. So who would like to?
I'll leave that to Sheikh Hanab.
Actually, I think, first of all, the positive aspect of the survey, the 85% that believe that they are in a better situation in the Gulf. I think, yes, that is because the governments have been the biggest employer in the Gulf for the last 3 decades. I think now there is a move that the governments are making sure they're more efficient, and they're making sure that they only take what they need from and provide jobs that they need, rather than just be a provider for everyone. The question: are we still a society of entitlement? And do we still act this way? There is a part of the truth. Yes, we are. It is changing. The youth of today have a completely different mindset than the previous generations. It is changing, but we were brought up in a manner that the government will take care of you from when you are born until your grave. This mindset is changing. The private sector is providing more and more jobs in the Gulf region. And I think what we're seeing today is a more positive reaction from the youth of that region.
I want to follow up with this on the optimism and positivity side. Because I thought, I wasn't surprised by the Levant and North Africa findings in terms of optimism waning a bit. I was surprised that the 85% from the Gulf. Last year, one of the findings was very interesting, that the majority in the Gulf thought subsidies should stay. And if anyone should pay for subsidies, it's foreigners. The governments in this region, you talk about Saudi Arabia, even Kuwait and Qatar, who have more ample buffers, are saying we can no longer provide government jobs. We can't do that on the long term. We need to cut the current spending to the wage bill. We need to cut subsidies. Qatar is cutting subsidies. Kuwait is thinking about cutting subsidies. Saudi Arabia is the same thing. If you're a policymaker, and my question is, do you take this finding as thinking this is an endorsement of the policies of economic change, of trying to cut the government role in society? And do you say, okay, fine, I'm going to continue with this?
I think it's a reflection of the change that is taking place into the society. Yes. If you explain to people why you're cutting subsidies and what's the trade-off in cutting subsidies, you'll be surprised how much they buy into that. But the optimism is they are seeing all these revised policies and renewed policies and the structural change within the economy and the understanding why the structural change is happening. That's what I think is fueling the optimism, nothing else.
But I think, Ala, the question was specifically on youth policies. and they were positive on the youth policies that
also on the economy. If your best days ahead of you or not, the majority, the vast majority in this region said, I think 85%, if I'm not mistaken, said they think the best days are ahead of them at a time when growth is slowing, unemployment is rising, because the governments are trying to cut deficits, trying to cut entitlements, trying to cut welfare. So I thought that was surprising.
But there is inaction being taken to fight these, and I think people are reading that as a positive side, particularly youth. And take Saudi Arabia today, all the initiatives that are taking place, the Vision 2030, etc., are all basically fueling that optimism. Even though there are concerns, but still they are fueling optimism.
You have should I move on?
No, I'll pass. It's okay.
Okay. I have one more point to raise, and then a question from the audience, and it's on one more finding, which is Trump's approval rating. I thought it was a bit of a surprise, and I want not the surprise that, for me, the surprise was he scored even lower than George Bush, who invaded an Arab country. Why do you think there is such a negative attitude at the very start of the administration? Is it because of what he says rather than what he does?
It's simply his populist narrative. If you look at his election campaign, that populist narrative that he used obviously has to have a reflection on his popularity. You're insulted, you're not going to love someone who insults you. As simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, his demeanor, his language, the way he addresses the issue of diversity in general, and specifically on Islam and the ban of travel. I mean, why would we want to like him?
But I guess now reality is sinking in. What's to like? I guess now reality is sinking in, and
it's like the neighborhood bully. You know, you're not going to be in love with him.
I'd like to take more questions from the audience, please, the lady.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Habiba Al-Mar'ashi, and I run Emirates Environmental Group, which is an environmental NGO, and the other one is the Arabia CSR Network. Thank you very much first to Sunil John for really organizing this kind of very, very impactful forums. God knows that this region really needs more of it, and we need to engage more of the stakeholders. I really go straight to Fadi. Thank you really, Fadi. You touched on very important issues. You talked about educators. Do you really believe that we do have educators, or we only have teachers? Because the educators that taught me and you are different than the teachers that we have today. The educators touch on so many other issues, not just the material that was in the textbook that was to be given to us. They taught us morals, they taught us values, ethics, a lot of issues that came. Do we have that in our educational systems at the moment in this country? You touched on another important point, and I would like to clarify.
Because for time constraints, please limit the question.
So my question is, do you believe we do have educators? My second question is, you talked about people asking you, you know, the teachers, universities asking you, what do you really need? What does that mean? Are we having a disconnect between what is coming out of our educational system and universities and what the market really needs? Thank you.
I'm going to take two more questions from here, and then we can answer them at the end. Please, we'll take two more questions from this side. The gentleman at the very back, he raised... oh, sorry, please go ahead first.
Okay. Sorry, I'm Eva, and I just graduated from CAS, so that's my affiliation. I have a question regarding the last statement that was made on the panel, which was kind of like, okay, first there was Al-Qaeda, and then there was Daesh, and there will be something else. I mean, has this region really given up on the fact that maybe there might be a future where there's no more extremism? I mean, looking at Europe, without glorifying it, but after World War II, obviously it was destroyed, and still, you know, there was no more Nazi movement after. So shouldn't there be a way to kind of like build the infrastructure and build the capability to actually define a future without Daesh and its successors?
Thank you very much. One last question, please.
My question is to Mr. Fadi. You mentioned when you started that the Arab youth are asking government, but they don't ask the private sector. Now, talking about the broken education system all over the Arab world and being a representative of the private sector, my question is, are you willing or planning to do anything to support the education specifically in Jordan or in Lebanon or any other country as a proof of the role of the private sector in solving the education problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll answer the questions and then wrap up. Please, Mr. Mandur, start.
So the first question is, do we have teachers or do we have educators? I think we don't want to generalize, but the product that's coming out tells us that the learning system is broken. The outcome of the education system is broken, and that requires a lot of work that is societal. It is no longer, I think we need to finally know that it is no longer an issue of only government. It needs society as a whole, including parents. It needs us all to come together and say, what is it that we need to do? Because if we don't recognize and accept and declare failure, we think we're succeeding. I mean, you have to declare that it's not working. The other question I want to respond to on Daesh and Europe. So give us a break a little bit here in the region. We did not have tens of millions of people killed because of religious or ideological extremism. Yes, we have our issues today, but Europe has had worse conditions for itself. So we don't want to only be continuously hammered. We will address our issues. We will address our issues, but we need people to get away from us a little bit so that we can address our own internal issues. And number three, if you're asking me personally, what am I doing? I have a non-profit organization called Ruwad. We give hundreds and hundreds of scholarships every year in the marginalist, in the most of the margins of society in Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, and Palestine. We give them scholarships in return for a volunteer work in their society, solving issues, hyper-local within their own community. Why do we do that? Because we don't believe the education system is good enough. So we give them a scholarship in return for character building by saying we own our neighborhood and we will solve its issues. This person that gets an education and feels responsible for his society is a different person that only gets a degree and thinks society owes him.
Mr. Haddad, God knows I don't want to glorify the Arab world, but Europe had 2 world wars and a bunch of conflicts in the 19th century. But is it, I mean, we've had our problems too, but is the comparison fair?
It is very fair. What we all tend to forget is the violence that swept across Europe way after the Second World War. The ETA, the Red Brigades, Baader-Meinhof, and you name them. Effectively, they are all product of disillusion in a society. Yes, we're going through a disillusion phase. We're going to go through that phase, and we're going to learn from that phase. And still today in Europe, you have, and that is, in terms of statistic importance, is really minute from a statistical importance. Not unlike exactly the Baader-Meinhof and the Red Brigades and the Red Army and the Shining Pass and you name them. These are phenomena that happen within society among groups that are disillusioned with their environment and that act. And that's the phase we're going through.
But to take the other side, okay, and perhaps Sheikh Hanad would like to comment on this. Yes, we say we will address our problems, but we've been saying this
but
for
we've
the good
addressed
part
them. No, but we don't realize there were upheavals in the 50s, that were upheavals in the 60s, and they were addressed progressively.
But the underlying causes, though, the underlying causes that we're talking about that lead to these extremist movements.
No, let's look at the global economy, because again, to go back to where the have and have not divide that is being created and this abyss that is being created is a true phenomenon across the world. You really look at why populism have succeeded in the recent election, Brexit, Trump, etc. This divide is there to stay because the way productivity is measured have changed, the way the economy creates jobs have changed, and we're going through an adjustment phase, and we have to. Now, it's more pronounced in the Middle East, no doubt, because the ground, and don't forget, the Middle East is only 80, 90 years old economy. It's not 300 years economy. We didn't have the steam age, we didn't have all these industrial revolution. We didn't have all that. We need to adjust to it, and we're in the process, and it will adjust. I have great faith looking at all the talents, at entrepreneurs, at young people acting, that things will change. The NGOs of this that are being created. So the society is in an evolution. A society evolves constantly. The only thing is, how can you help it to put guardrails to get it to the right destination? But it's a journey, and we have to go through that journey.
Sheikh Hana, do you think we're going at the journey fast enough? Or again, because we've been talking about
70 years, man, it's very fast. Where we were and where we are, you can't go faster, frankly.
I'm a journalist. I have to
hey, you can't go faster.
Actually, I want to take you one step backwards. I think we're speaking about the generation of change. This generation, the only constant that it knows is change. So they're going very fast. But I think what we can wrap up, here is that we're facing a lot of challenges. The Daesh question, unemployment and everything. But I'm a firm believer that we create our own destinies. This report shows you that every one of us has a very specific role to play and a very important role to play in facing all of these challenges. It's not the government alone. It's not thinking about what's happening in the US or Russia. It's what we do. We have a lot of problems in our backyards. How do we face them? How do we prioritize them? And how do we create mechanisms that can scale up to really look at the question of unemployment, about the youth not finding a dignified, optimistic life to look up to. So I think that is a wrap-up of what's happening.
Okay. To wrap up, I mean, it's a region on the cusp of major changes that's happening, imposed because whether wars or the low oil prices, and hopefully we're not going to sit here in the next 5 years discussing the same findings. There will be different problems, but also perhaps
we'll ask different questions,
different outcomes. I'd like to thank my panelists, Sheikh Hanadi bin Nasser Al Thani, Mr. Fadi Ghandour, Mr. Roy Haddad. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If you can pull up the tweets, please. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed has again tweeted some of the results, and it's interesting for you to see what he says. I think it's in Arabic. It'll come in a couple of hours in English. But I told you Arabic matters. Yeah, Fadi's always right. Yeah, but I want to read out one particular tweet. He says, "And I say to Arab youth, the UAE is the country for all. The dreams and aspirations of Arab youth and our dreams. The UAE aspires for peace throughout the Arab world." I want a round of applause for His Highness. Yeah. Earlier in the briefing, Her Excellency Sheikh Hanadi asked me, but where's the viewpoint of the Syrian refugees, people who are not part of this sample? And I think it's a very, very important question. And in fact, we did think about it, and we actually this year did a survey among Syrian refugees in the camps in Lebanon and in Jordan. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be coming out with the results of that particular survey. And I'm sure it'll be very, very interesting. All of the material that you have is up on the website, arabyouthsurvey.com. You can share it with your friends, with people who you think will benefit from this. I also want to take the opportunity to thank a number of people who worked across the last 5 months to bring this report to you. My team in ASDA'A, the team from PSB in Washington, D.C., London, and here in Dubai, the team at Proof, which has put this wonderful report together, and the website, and thank all of you for coming today. Please join us for lunch, which is served outside in the foyer. Thank you very much.
يحتضن الشرق الأوسط النسبة الأكبر من الشباب في العالم. 60% من المواطنين العرب هم من سن 30 وثلثهم أي أكثر من 100 مليون شخص تتراوح أعمارهم بين 15 و 29 عاما. إن آمال وتطلعات الشباب العربي ترسم مستقبل الشرق الأوسط.
We believe the voices of our youth are crucial to the way we shape our future.
What do Arab youth think? How do they see their future? What do they expect from their governments? What are their hopes, fears, and aspirations? Understanding Arab youth is important for anyone who has a stake in this region. Governments, policymakers, and businesses need actionable insight into the region's largest demographic, its youth. And that is why we do the Arab Youth Survey every year for the last 9 years.
استطلاع أصداء بورسون-مارستلر لرأي الشباب العربي هو الدراسة المستقلة الأكبر من نوعها. استطلاع هذا العام يغطي 3500 مقابلة مع شبان وشابات عرب في 16 بلدا وينتمون للفئة العمرية بين 18 و 24 عاما. تم رصد آرائهم حول مجموعة متنوعة من المواضيع، مخاوفهم وتطلعاتهم، آراؤهم حول نظام التعليم والاقتصاد، تأثير البطالة والإرهاب على حياتهم، انتخاب دونالد ترامب وغيرها الكثير من المواضيع. انضموا إلينا لنستكشف معا الآراء الغنية للشباب العربي.